All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Obviously today we're going to announce the budget targets for the House, and we're doing this, first I'd like to give you a little context. From 2000 to 2013, median household income for Minnesotans increased 12%. During that same time, if the governor's budget proposal became law, the increase in government spending since 2000 would be 75%. The bottom line is this: government spending cannot grow faster than family budgets. We set our budget target with that value in mind, and at the same time, we're going to show Minnesota that we can prioritize education, we can prioritize roads and bridges, and we can prioritize protecting our aging Minnesotans' way of life. While the state budget has a surplus, most Minnesotans are not seeing a surplus in their own family budgets. That's why we're also going to propose to give $2 billion into the hands of hardworking Minnesotans. And to introduce the specifics of our budget target proposals, I'm going to introduce Jim. Is Jim going to go first, or are you going to go first?
I'll let Jim go after me.
Oh, okay. I'll let Joyce go first.
Yeah.
Jim to go through the details.
You know, Minnesotans prioritize their budgets every day. They have to live by a family budget, and it only makes sense that government should have to do the same thing. So our approach is very common sense, and it reflects streamlining in some areas and investing in other areas, just like families do. And so we're very proud of our decision today. We're prioritizing education, roads and bridges, and the care of our aging loved ones. So as we move forward, we want Minnesotans to know that we are doing our job to prioritize state budgets just as they are doing their job prioritizing their own budgets at home. With that, we'll turn it over to Chair Knoblach.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. If you look at this chart here, remember, got to get into a little bit of state budget accounting here. We're talking about what are we going to spend in the general fund in 2016 through 2017. And the GOP budget proposal is to spend $39,949 million. We will then have tax relief above that of $2 billion to Minnesotans. You heard about our Road and Bridge Act yesterday. There's $612 million that is beyond the $39.949 billion. Some of that money that's dedicated to our new Transportation Stability Fund, so not part of the general fund in 16 and 17. Some of it money that's being carried over from the budget surplus in 2015. The governor did not put any money into the budget reserve, despite the fact that he's proposing to spend nearly $43 billion. We are actually proposing to put an additional $100 million into the budget reserve. The $15 million here is the deficiency that bill passed earlier, and something that is probably unusual that I would guess that people haven't seen before in a state budget is this bottom line of yet to be allocated funds. Now, traditionally, the Ways and Means Chair and the Finance Chair in the Senate will hold maybe $5 million or $10 million for other miscellaneous bills. We've decided to actually have $319 million that we hold over as unallocated money. Now, why would we do that? A couple reasons. First, we don't know necessarily where the economy is going to go. This gives us flexibility to put additional money into the budget reserve if we feel like we should do that. In addition, as you look at our spending targets, there's always a process going through setting budgets in the legislatures, looking at hearings, particularly in the Health and Human Services area, which is a very complex budget. There are a lot of different things going on, a lot of different proposals. It's hard to sometimes get a firm fiscal note for some of these things. And so we've got money here that we can allocate towards other spending initiatives if we feel like it, without having to go through and take it out of something else to which it's already been allocated. And so we are leaving an unprecedented amount of money on the bottom line. It might be money that we carry into next year. It's likely that we'll decide in the next 30 days what we want to do with it based on additional hearings and such that we have in our committees as we put the budgets together. But this gives us some additional flexibility if we need it. And I think I will flip the chart over to a chart that only an accountant could love. If you look at this, and I know it's a lot of numbers, I can only say it could have been worse. You can see the various committees that we have, how much money is projected to spend in the 2 years that are ending June 30th this year, how much money we are proposing to spend in the next 2 years. So in agriculture, there's been a lot of talk about rural Minnesota, greater Minnesota. We are proposing to spend some additional money in the Agriculture Committee for some initiatives that Representative Hamilton has. In the capital projects and grants area, you'll see it goes down a lot. That's partly because we had this big cash spending bill of $199 million last year that we're not proposing to do. But we are not planning on doing a bonding bill this year. That saves $21 million out of that $132 million there on the end there. We still have budgeted in here an $800 million bonding bill next year. But we are not planning on doing a bonding bill this year. We don't see that we need any emergency bonding money for anything this year. In the environment area, the number goes down a lot. There was a lot of one-time money spent in 14 and 15, and of course with the legacy fund now, there's a lot of other additional environmental spending that goes on. In the jobs and economic development area, we as Republicans believe that by and large, government doesn't create jobs. We've had a lot of one-time money spent in 14-15 on various economic development initiatives. We think with the economy recovering like it has that we don't need to spend that kind of money in 16 and 17. And as a matter of fact, even within this number, we're going to have some significant fee decreases to further help our business climate and environment in this state. In the Health and Human Services area, you will see that we are proposing to spend $443 million more of general fund money. That doesn't count an additional $3 or $4 billion in increased other money from federal funds and other non-general fund monies that are going to be going into the Health and Human Services area. And within this number, we are planning on still having our long-term care initiative, which the current fiscal note says is $168 million, although those fiscal notes have bounced around some, but we are still planning on having our long-term care number. And there will be some other initiatives, new initiatives in there also that the Health and Human Services Committee is looking at. This is an area, if there's any of them, where there is, as I mentioned, a lot of additional hearings and thought that needs to be considered. There's discussion by some people that we should get rid of MNsure, that it's failing. There's discussion by other people that the way to save MNsure is to blend Minnesota Care into it so that we've got more people there. There's discussion that we can't afford Minnesota Care as a state and we should instead have that be part of the federal exchange. These are the sort of questions that even the governor, I understand, has recently convened a study commission on to look at. We will be addressing some of those questions in the next month as we put together our Health and Human Services budget. And to the extent we need any additional money to address some of those questions, we again have the $300 million some dollars on the bottom line that is available. Underneath higher education, we're proposing to go up $103 million. However, there's really more than that available. If you look at the private grant program, because they're projecting the number of students in the private grant program to go down, there's actually a $72 million surplus that is projected there. And so there is, potentially as much as $175 million that you could allocate out to either the U of M, MNSCU, the private grant program, or all three of them. People are going to ask, well, do you have enough money to freeze tuition? There are some policy questions about whether that's a good idea or not. We would have enough money to freeze tuition in one of the systems if that's something that we choose to do. There are a lot of policy questions about whether that's a good idea everywhere, and again, that's something that Higher Ed Committee will be discussing. E12 education, actually has an enormous increase. Much of it was built in last year by the budgets that were passed. We had, in addition to the $15.8 billion that was spent or is being spent in 14-15, another $813 million of shifts that were paid off. So, I mean, if you look at the budget documents, you'll sometimes see that, gee, it was actually $16.6 billion that we spent this year, but really 800 some million of that was paying off shifts. This is sort of the money not counting shifts that are going to K-12, E-12 institutions, schools this year. This is what we're proposing to spend in 16-17. So it's a $1 billion increase to early childhood and K-12 education. Public safety, we're proposing to go up about $100 million. State government finance, we're going to be cutting ourselves back. We're going to be cutting back legislative expenses. We're going to be cutting the legislative carry forward, or proposing to cut it. We have to see what our friends in the Senate think of this idea. We're looking at getting rid of the PCR program and some of the other funding for politicians. We don't think that taxpayers should be funding political campaigns. So that's where some of that decrease comes from. In the tax committee, there will be an increase of $286 million. This is not tax cuts, but these are property tax refunds, renters credits, LGA, things like that. Finally, down in the transportation area, you'll see a negative number here. Now, that doesn't include the $612 million of money that I talked about on the other chart here, if you maybe turn that around. This is other general fund money in 16 and 17. Doesn't include the $228 million that's being carried forward from 15 here. Doesn't include the $384 million that is being dedicated out of the auto parts sales tax to transportation. And of course, it doesn't include any trunk highway bonding or general fund bonding or spending of MnDOT reserves or other things like that that were talked about in the Road and Bridge Act that was talked about yesterday. And with that, there's a small amount of less spending in the miscellaneous category that we're proposing to spend. That is the budget. It is still growing. If you look at, if you take out the education shift and you added these up compared to the 39,949, it's still growing by roughly $1.5 billion from 2014-15 to 16-17. But the fact that it is roughly $3 billion less than what Governor Dayton is proposing to spend just shows you how much of an enormous increase in spending Governor Dayton is again proposing with his budget. And with that, I think I'm ready for questions. Kurt, go ahead.
I want to just talk about this.
Oh, all right.
Again, this graph really shows a little better in detail what I was talking about when we started. The guiding principle through this budget has been that government spending should not grow faster than family budgets. And I think when you ask Minnesotans if they believe that, I think you'll get a resounding yes. We need to make sure that we're putting our priorities, and this is what we've said that we wanted to do from the beginning, put our priorities back on Minnesota families. The yellow line down here shows what has happened since 2000 to 2013 to median family income. And if you look at what has happened to state spending, you can see that obviously state spending is outpacing family budgets by a pretty good margin. In the dotted area here, this really shows what would happen under our budget proposal versus what would happen under the governor's budget proposal. And I think that it's time that we get state spending under control. This really is the problem. And that's why we've addressed this with the guiding principle that government spending should not grow faster than family budgets.
There's one other thing I've got to talk about too, and that is in the Health and Human Services area. One area that we are really going to highlight as a way to save costs is something that the legislative auditor, the nonpartisan legislative auditor, testified before the Ways and Means Committee on back a couple months ago. If you look at this report, which is November 12th, 2014, on page 7, I believe it is in the executive summary, you will find that in an audit they did, and I'll quote from the legislative auditor, "We found that nearly 17% of the people in the sample we tested were not eligible for the public health care program in which they were enrolled." There are an enormous number of people in our state that are not eligible for the public health program that they're in. We're forecasted to spend $10 billion just in general fund spending on medical assistance in the next biennium. Now, that doesn't mean that 17% of the people on medical assistance are ineligible. In some cases, it means that there's someone on MNsure that should be on a better, more expensive program like medical assistance. But there is an enormous number of people that are simply not eligible for these programs at all. If you go through the fine details of this report, it's probably around 9% of the people that are on medical assistance aren't actually eligible for medical assistance. And we're going to have a major initiative that saves hundreds of millions of dollars for the state by concentrating on medical assistance and simply getting people off medical assistance that aren't eligible for it because they make too much money. This is an issue that is being faced by every other state. Other states like Illinois have had major initiatives that we have studied to crack down on people being on medical assistance that shouldn't be on it because they simply make too much money. And we're not talking about throwing anyone off medical assistance unless they don't belong there because they make too much money. And so this is an area that we're going to be, I believe, saving the state a lot of money in. It's an area that I think the governor and the Senate should really be interested in because there's a lot of taxpayers' money being spent here that shouldn't be spent. So I'm glad I remembered to bring that up. Anything else? Otherwise, we're open for questions.
Speaker, would you break down the tax cuts, tax relief, the $2 billion, where's that going?
We haven't yet determined that. And obviously, these are targets, and our tax committee, the chair and the members of the tax committee will work through that process over the coming weeks to figure out exactly where that money can be best invested.
Like to see it go?
Well, our priority really is to put money in the pockets of hardworking Minnesota families. I think, we learned with the budget forecast that leaving money in Minnesotans' pockets is good for Minnesota's economy. And frankly, we think that should be a guiding principle with the way the state proceeds forward. We think that's a great investment. Obviously, what we've created here is a budget that we think is sustainable over the long term. And we've shown that we can prioritize K-12 education. We're prioritizing transportation. We're prioritizing our aging population. And we're prioritizing Minnesotans, which frankly hasn't been done in the last couple of years here in St. Paul.
Are you talking about not rebates, Mr. Speaker?
No. Remember that this surplus is a forecasted surplus. We really don't have it yet. We don't have it in the bank, and it's projected that if nothing else changes, a little more than 2 years from now, if we didn't spend it, that money would be in the bank. So sending checks back is not something that we're really considering. We'll likely want to target tax relief to help out Minnesota families.
Will you consider some of the tax credits that Governor Dayton has proposed, the child care tax credit and some of those others for low-income families?
We certainly would consider that. I haven't had specific conversations with the tax chair about how he feels about that specific provision, and we need to look at how that would fit in with some of the other ideas that are being tossed around, but we certainly would look at them.
If I could say one thing to that quickly, just one thing I really did like that Governor Dayton did was this expansion of the education tax credit for public and private school families and moving up the income limits so that more people can qualify for it. And that's actually a bill that I have. Mine expands it even a little bit more, but certainly I'm going to be pushing for a variation of the governor's initiative in that area.
Mr. Speaker, how prominently should business tax relief, in your opinion, figure into this whole mix of the $2 billion?
There will probably be some. At this point, I'm not sure how much, but our priority is going to be on Minnesota families and really giving them the tax relief. So, some of this, obviously, we want to spur Minnesota's economy to continue to grow, and some of that will be fixing some things that we've maybe done in the past, the June Accelerator, some of those kinds of things that obviously will be targeted businesses, but really they're fixing some gimmicks that had been put in place in the past, and I think we've got an opportunity with a surplus now to fix some of those things.
Less than half, though, you would say, of the $2 billion would
That would be my
Substantially less
guess.
than half?
I don't know at this point. I haven't talked to Chair Davids about it. I don't want to be respectful to him and the committee. Really, what we've done is try to take this from a different perspective. Our priority has been on Minnesota families. We want to make sure that we're spending every dollar effectively and efficiently that Minnesotans have given us. So really, we've tried to look at each target here from the spending perspective and what needs to be spent, and also compare it to our current level of spending and what Minnesotans would expect as far as an increase or you know, keeping it level. So we haven't really focused on that, you know, our priority is we're going to give, you know, X number of dollars back. We really wanted to put together a balanced proposal that spent on our priorities. That was the first and foremost, and also as part of that, the priority was also to prioritize Minnesotans, and a big part of that is going to be making sure that they get some tax relief. And we know from the last forecast that that's good for Minnesota's economy.
Can you explain to Minnesotans who don't understand how there's a $1.9 billion surplus,
Yep.
you got $2 billion in tax relief, plus a lot of new spending here. How does all that
Well,
shake out?
obviously, the surplus starts from a new base, which really is a fictitious number. You know, this seems to me one of the things that's very confusing about what we do here. Our level of spending in 14-15, I don't know if the number's here, 39.3 something was the level of spending in 14-15. And then, you know, we have to have a balanced budget according to our Constitution in the state of Minnesota. So what happens, and what Democrats did during the last 2 years, was hide spending in the next biennium. Well, we also have a portion of our Constitution which says one legislature can't bind the next. So that the Democrats didn't do our homework for us. We can't just all go home because they put some things in statute. If we don't enact a budget here, the government would shut down. So obviously, that's really a fictitious number, and we have really wanted to focus more on what has been spent, where the priorities should be to create a new budget. So that surplus doesn't start from until you get to the new base. And really, we don't believe that number should be used for anything more than planning.
Increases that have been set in the base.
In most areas of the state budget, we're increasing spending from current levels, and I think that's the part that Minnesotans care about. And when you ask them if they think that state government should grow faster than their own family budgets, I think you get a resounding no. It shouldn't.
Well, in that regard, though, the human services spending is the thing I'm particularly interested in. Representative Knoblach, how does your figure in the proposal differ from the forecasted human services figure, which does include inflation, I understand?
Yes, this figure, as compared to what was built in by the Democrats, by the last legislature, is $1.1 billion below what we projected in the law to spend. And so even though we're going up and that's general fund spending, I mean, even though we're going up $443 million in general fund spending and another $3 or $4 billion in other fund spending, it's not going up, I believe it's $5.5 billion, which is where it would be if you looked at what the current law is. And that's because we're going to be doing things like looking at the legislative auditor report, having this eligibility initiative, cutting back on the number of people that are on medical assistance because they aren't eligible for it, and making some other changes as well.
Can you say more about those other changes? You won't get to $1 billion by cutting people off of who don't belong on medical assistance.
Well, you know, that's a matter for the committee to look at, and I know they're looking at a lot of different initiatives. They're looking at, I think, maybe cutting back some of the personnel in some of the departments. I know they're looking at some of the other administrative costs that are out there related to our state health plans. But these are all really decisions for the committee. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of discussion about what to do about MNsure, what to do about Minnesota Care. You know, those are other things that are being discussed. There's, you know, more than that in savings available if you did everything, but we're not going to be doing everything. It's a matter for the committee to have hearings on and determine what they want to do. And again, if we find out that we don't think we can do what is right there, we do have that $300-some million on the bottom line that we can redeploy if we need to.
Well, Mr. Chairman, along
Representative
that same
Knoblach has to get to
line,
committee, so last question.
along that same line on health and human services spending, if you want to reduce the number of people on medical assistance, And there are proposals to do away with Minnesota Care, there are proposals to shut down MNsure. Where do those folks go?
Well, it's up to how much money they make. I mean, if they make too much money to be on medical assistance, as it's written right now, then they wouldn't be on medical assistance. If they still qualified for Minnesota Care or still qualified for MNsure, then they'd be on those programs.
How do you get $100 million out of jobs and economic development? What are you targeting there?
Well, there were a lot of one-time expenditures there in the last 2 years that simply we aren't doing this time.
Will there be any talk about cutting income taxes?
You know, I guess that's really a question for Representative Davids and the Tax Committee. I mean, we've got $2 billion to work with, but I don't think that they have a particular, you know, tax bill or tax initiative that they've put together yet. I mean, they haven't. It's something that we're having hearings on, and as was mentioned, in fact, I've got to get off to one. But otherwise, we don't have a specific tax proposal yet other than what the Speaker talked about. Well, thank you very much. And I'll, are you ready?
Could you clarify, is the 2 billion, did you say on top of the 39.9 or is included in that number?
No, the 2 billion is on top of the 39.9. If you add up all these numbers, they total the 42.996 billion that is available. So if you looked at all the money that we had, general fund money that was available, there's about 43 billion, and essentially this is what we are doing with it.
Why isn't it fair to add the 612 to the 39.9? I mean, isn't that essentially you're taking general fund money and using it for just a different purpose, but it's still coming out of the general fund, right?
Well, no, because this is our budget proposal for what we're spending in 2016 to 17. And this is two numbers. It's $228 million that's coming out of the surplus in 2015. If you look back to our House File 4, the language in there is that money's coming out of the surplus that we had in 2015. So it's not 16-17 money, it's 2015 money. Then the other $384 million is the auto parts sales tax. And just like the gas tax is its own separate fund and not part of the general fund, so the gas tax receipts that we get aren't in here. The auto parts sales tax, which is now going to be a dedicated fund, is also not in here. But it is part of the total of $43 billion that we've got available. It used to be general fund money, now we're putting it elsewhere. Thank you very much.